the story of the Great Family by Godly Play and Church Publishing. This is the desert. It's not the whole desert. We couldn't fit all of that in our room, but it's like a little piece of the desert. And we need some of the desert in our room because so many of the stories in the Bible happened in the desert. But the desert is a dangerous place. It can get very hot during the day. There's not much water or much food. You have to wear lots of clothes at night because it gets so cold. The wind, as it blows across the desert, can sting your skin if you don't have lots of clothes on. The desert is a dangerous place, and people don't go into the desert unless they have to. After the flood, the people of the earth grew and spread out in cities and along the rivers so that they would have water. There was one family who settled in the city of Ur. The man's name was Abram, and his wife's name was Sarai. In Ur, people believed that there were many gods, and the gods were in everything, in the trees, and the wind, and the water. Their world was alive with gods. But Abram and Sarai believed that there was one God, and all of God was in every place. They didn't know that that's what they believed yet, but they did believe it. One day they decided that it was time to move to a new place called Haran. And so they set off on the journey, and they followed the river. And the river gave them water to drink and food to eat. It was a long journey, and they traveled with all of their many helpers, their animals, their sheep. Maybe they had donkeys or camels. And finally, they were almost to Haran. Sometimes, late at night, Abram liked to go out into the desert by himself and pray. And God would come so close to Abram, and Abram would come so close to God that he knew what God wanted him to do. God wanted them to move again. He said, "I will make you into a great family, and I will bless you." So Abram and Sarah began to move once more. But this time, they didn't have the river to show them the way. When they made it to Shechem, Abram prayed, and God was there. And so he built an altar to thank God for being there on their journey with them. And they continued on their way. And when they reached Bethel, Abram prayed again, and God was there too. And so he built another altar to remember that place and that God was there too. And they continued on their journey until they arrived at Hebron, near the oaks of Mamre. When they arrived there and they settled, sometime later, Abram went out into the desert again. And God came close to Abram and Abram was close to God. And God told Abram, I will make you a father of many nations. You will be a great family. But Abram was so old, and so was Sarai. They couldn't have children. Abram wasn't sure if he believed God, but God decided to change their names anyway. Abram would now be Abraham, and Sarai would now be Sarah. Well, sometime later, 3 strangers came into the desert, and Sarai made them food out of 3 measures of flour, which is a lot. They told Abraham that he would have a son this time next year. Well, Sarah laughed. She was too old. But do you know what happened? A year later, they did have a son, and they named him Isaac. In their language, that means laughter. Well, after many years, Sarah was very old, and she died and was buried under the oaks of Mamre. And Abram, he was very sad and lonely without Sarah, but he still had one thing that he needed to do. He wanted to find a wife for his son Isaac. And so he sent one of his helpers to go back to near their homeland. And when one of his helpers was going to the well to get water for his animals, a young woman came out, and her name was Rebekah. She was as kind as she was beautiful. And she gave water to the helper and to all of his animals. And the helper told her all about the great family. Rebekah decided that she wanted to be a part of this great family. And so she made the long journey back. And when she was still a little bit away, but not too far, Isaac saw her, and he ran out to meet her. And eventually they were married. Now, Abraham was old and full of many years, and so he too died and was buried beside Sarah under the oaks of Mamre. But eventually, Isaac and Rebekah had children, and their children had children, all the way until your grandparents were born, and they had children, and then your parents had children, and you were born. And now you too are a part of this great family that is as big as the stars in the sky and the sand in the desert. Now I wonder, which part of this story was your favorite? I wonder which part was the most important. I wonder if there is anything that we could leave out and still have all that we need. I wonder where you are in this story. Which part of it is especially for you? Now for your work today, I hope you still have some things in your craft bag, and if not, you can always use craft materials that you have at home. Maybe you want to look at some of the extra materials that don't go along with a specific story. In mine, I see that I have some string, so maybe I want to make the rivers like in this story. Maybe I want to color, or maybe you have other materials at home that you want to use. But as always, only you know what is right for you.